It's just a bit after 6, so if, I mean, we can get started, and as people join, we can let them in, and just so everyone knows, you were notified when you came in that this is being recorded, and it'll be put up on the BSA COTE website, so in case you want to share out with folks later, that's will definitely be possible. So please mute yourself if you aren't, and if you have any questions, please put them in the chat or hold them to the end so we can have time. Beth, if you want to lead off. Beth, did you have any announcements or anything? Or you?
Sorry, I was muted. No, that was just the CUs, and I think if you don't have anything else, we can get started.
John, it's over to you.
All right, sounds good. Can you hear me? Great. Okay, so tonight we are going to talk about design for ecosystems. We have 2 guests here that I'll introduce in a minute, but for those of you who don't know, the definition is the good design benefits for humans and non-humans. So the goal is to have designs that positively impact the connections between our projects and humans and nature. So understanding those dynamics will help improve our projects and make sure that they are having a positive impact on the environment. So tonight, I've had the pleasure of working with both Liz and EB. They are gonna, I'll do a quick bio here and then let them get right into it. Liz Stetson is the Senior Director of Capital Assets and Planning at Mass Audubon. In her role at Mass Audubon, Liz manages the planning, design, and construction of new sanctuaries, nature centers, and accessible trails across the Commonwealth, as well as maintenance and renovations to existing facilities. Liz's work involves facilitation between architects, landscape architects, contractors, and cross-departmental teams of Mass Audubon staff, including property managers, educators, and scientists. Prior to joining Mass Audubon, Liz was a practicing landscape architect, managing projects ranging from private residences to public gardens and facilities. Liz received her master's in landscape architecture from the University of Pennsylvania. And Elizabeth Randell, I guess EB or Elizabeth, what do you like? EB?
EB's fine, okay. Yeah.
All right. So EB is the principal and director of practice at Reed Hildebrand. As principal at Reed Hildebrand, she has contributed to the design and construction of many of the firm's projects at a range of scales, from urban plazas, streetscapes, greenways, and campuses to less urban institutional and residential landscapes. Her project work includes Clark Art Institute, Boston's Pier 4, and public realm design for portions of Harvard University's Future Enterprise Research Campus, among others. In her role as director of practice, EB has led hiring, staffing, professional development initiatives, and she's also taught at Harvard Graduate School of Design and served as a guest critic at Northeastern University. She's also addressed conferences at the American Society of Landscape Architects, Florida ASLA, and the Urban Design Forum. She received her Master's of Landscape Architecture from Harvard Graduate School of Design. So thank you both so much for being with us here tonight. We'll jump into presentations. Liz will start, and we'll transfer over to EB, and we'll have some time afterwards for some conversation and Q&A. So thank you.
John, for that nice introduction, and thanks so much for having us here tonight. EB and I are really pleased and excited to be able to talk with this group. So I'm going to share some slides and we'll dive right in. Okay, hopefully that looks all right to everybody. Excellent. All right, so I'm going to start with just sharing a little bit about Mass Audubon, who we are, and our work, and then I'm going to profile 2 recent projects that we've been involved in. The first is Pawtucket Farm in Lowell, and Brewster's Woods in Concord that we have partnered with Reed Hildebrand on, and EB will talk more in depth about our work at Brewster's Woods. In both cases, I'm going to try and share a little bit about how through deep collaboration between our staff, our design partners, and the communities in which we work, we're able to create spaces that both provide access for people to the outdoors and are ecologically healthy and resilient. So first, just a little bit about Mass Audubon. Our mission is to protect the nature of Massachusetts for people and wildlife, which really, I think, gets to the heart of what we're talking about tonight. Through all of our work, we're trying to balance both elements of that mission. Mass Audubon is the largest nature-based conservation organization in New England. We were founded in 1896 by Harriet Hemingway and her cousin Minna Hall. They had read about the killing of birds and use of bird feathers in fashion, and decided that they needed to do something about that. So the two of them got together over tea, and from that initial meeting, Mass Audubon was born. So a lot of people think of us as the bird people, and that was kind of the founding of our organization, but our work has extended well beyond that today. Our current action agenda plan focuses on 3 critical issues that are really defining kind of the environmental challenges of our world today. And that includes loss of biodiversity, primarily due to habitat loss, inequitable access to nature, and climate change. So, right off the bat, both those two first of our strategic goals may potentially seem at odds. We're trying to preserve habitat and provide a greater access to nature. But I think through collaboration with our staff and designers such as Reed Hildebrand, we've been able to really successfully balance both of those goals in a number of our projects. We do our work through kind of a variety of avenues. We conserve and restore land. We advocate for environmental policies, both locally, across the state and federally. We offer nationally recognized education programs for both adults and children. Our summer camp registration actually just opened up this morning, and I think we have 1,800 kids signed up for camp already, so very excited to get that underway. And we provide, endless opportunities for people to just experience the nature, get outside and experience the outdoors. Our organization is supported by 160,000 members across the state and beyond. We protect over 41,000 acres of land across Massachusetts, and we have over 100 wildlife sanctuaries. Some of those include just conserved land, and some of those are open to the public. This map shows those wildlife sanctuaries across the state. And, as you can see, we work in a hugely diverse range of places, diverse both in terms of ecology, geography, and demographics, all the way from the Sacajah Heathlands, which are on Nantucket. That includes about 870 acres of very rare heathland and sandplain grassland, to the Boston Nature Center in Mattapan. That's a 67-acre property, also home to the Boston Food Forest Coalition, as well as Boston's first Miyawaki microforest, which was just installed last year and has become home of the Boston Tree Alliance, where we're working with other organizations across the city to expand tree canopy. So from the islands to Boston, and then all the way out to Pleasant Valley in the Berkshires, that's a 1,000-acre property, mostly of forested woodland, as well as a network of beaver ponds. It's connected to a huge area of adjacent land. So although all those places, are very different types of landscapes, in every place that we work, we want to inspire visitors to care about the natural world. So we want to create connections with the environment while balancing that with our ecological goals for restoration and habitat protection. So I'm going to just dive into kind of two quick case studies about how we approach balancing those two things. The first, as I mentioned, is Pawtucket Farm in Lowell. This is a 20-acre property. It's actually the last remaining farm in Lowell and the last significant piece of undeveloped property within the city. It's a really interesting landscape, as you can see in these photos. It includes cornfields as well as a Christmas tree farm, which you can see on kind of the upper slopes here. As well as these very large kind of white pines, which have been limbed up to provide sun to the Christmas trees. Here again, just another view of kind of the cornfield and Christmas tree landscape. So for many years, a local organization, the Lowell Parks and Conservation Trust, has had an eye on preserving this property, knowing that it was kind of the last opportunity to preserve significant green space in Lowell. So with that in mind, several years ago, a partnership was formed between Mass Audubon, Lowell Parks and Conservation Trust, and Mill City Grows, which is a urban farming organization in Lowell. And we've had kind of a long multi-year process of forming that partnership and working with the current farmer his family has farmed this property for over 70 years. He lives in the house that his parents lived in, farmhouse on the property. So, he's a really significant part of the Lowell community, and it's been many years in the works for the property to transition from him to Mass Audubon. But as of last week, we just got to celebrate that acquisition process with our partner teams. If you look into this property, there's some nice press about it last week. So it's very, very exciting to be at this milestone of actually acquiring 2 of the 3 parcels that comprise the 20-acre property. Just in terms of location, Rowley's Farm is shown. It was previously called Rowley's Farm, now Pawtucket Farm, shown in red in the left here. It is kind of northwest of downtown Lowell. And the Lowell-Tinsburg State Forest, which you can see in just north of there, is kind of a significant local ecological resource as well. With any of our properties that we acquire, we conduct an ecological assessment and ecological management report. That's really kind of the first step in thinking about how we're going to use this property moving forward and where some of the ecological opportunities might lie and where some challenges may be present as well. So this is a fairly, extensive document that really looks into all elements of the natural features on the property, and in some cases gets into the cultural features as well. And I won't go through all of this, but I'm just going to highlight kind of a few key things that came out of this report at Pawtucket Farm. These reports are done by Mass Audubon ecological science staff who work, regionally and across the state. So we're very lucky to have that expertise on our team. So at Pawtucket Farm, one of the kind of unique attributes that we're excited about is actually this fine sandy soil. The site has a fair amount of topography change, and at the higher elevations is predominantly sandy soil, and it's a very open landscape. So our ecologists see a potential opportunity to kind of restore that into a sandplain grassland, which is one of the more rare landscape typologies in Massachusetts and home to unique species of birds and other wildlife. So that's a really incredible opportunity, regardless of where it was, but particularly in this setting where there's not a lot of natural open space. It's fairly dense. To be able to kind of restore that landscape in this place is really exciting, and is one of the attributes, ecological attributes of this property that we're interested in preserving, even as people begin to kind of access and use the site. Secondly, I mentioned that there's the Lowell Drake-Tinsboro State Forest nearby. So although this is only, the 20-acre property, there is this very large conservation area nearby and opportunities to kind of extend the wildlife corridor for animals, that may be using that property and may also, be accessing the river. So we are able to kind of provide a way station from river to that larger landscape. So the larger kind of regional ecological context of this property is really important and something we want to take advantage of as well. For this particular project, there are a number of cultural considerations as well. There's a number of environmental justice blocks within Lowell, as well as pretty significant kind of heat island effect in downtown Lowell. So, the fact that we were able to preserve this land is just really wonderful and provides much needed kind of green space for the residents of Lowell. So this ecological assessment, which included, many other maps, a lot of data, an inventory of all existing species, an inventory of invasive species, became kind of the foundation for design and planning process. This, as I said, was done kind of as a first step when we acquired the property. As our acquisition process moved forward, we wanted to engage a design team to begin to think about how we open up the property, how we can preserve those unique ecological attributes and bring people onto the property and have people kind of experience this wonderful place. So we engaged agency landscape and planning. So our landscape architects on the project and Heisel Flynn Architects are our architect, and they were also part of our acquisition celebration last week. So that's where we are here. They've been excellent partners on the project and have helped us really think through many elements of the project. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our planning process with these two design partners. Our process with agency began with really thinking about our organizational partnership as well, and what our three kind of partner organizations bring to this project, and kind of the diversity of our expertise, where we have kind of unique expertise and where we have shared expertise. And this sort of idea of nature, parks, and food security coming together on this one property has been kind of a guiding principle, both for how our three organizations work together, as well as planning, the physical development of the property. Internally at Mass Audubon, we have a very collaborative culture of shared expertise. To any of our projects, we bring, cross-departmental representation. And EB knows this well, that we often show up with, a cast of thousands to our meetings. But we really feel that expertise from our conservation scientists, from our educators, from, our property management folks who are actually doing the on-the-ground work of stewarding landscapes, expertise from all of these teams really makes our planning process very robust and results in, landscapes that work well across a variety of uses and support a variety of goals. So our kind of internal Mass Audubon way of working very much is aligned with our kind of three partner organization approach to collaboration. The planning process at Pawtucket Farm began with a really extensive community outreach effort, including listening sessions with other partner organizations, general members of the public in locations across the city, in 4 different languages, so we could really gather, you know, a wide range of perspectives and really cast a broad net in gathering input for what the residents of the city really wanted to see happen on this property. So it was that process happened in the summer last year and resulted in a framework planning set of principles that's been guiding the project moving forward. So these are the 4 principles that kind of emerged from that community engagement effort. And this was really what we heard from Lowellians about what they wanted to see happen at Pawtucket Farm. Access for all was a priority. We heard from a lot of multi-generational families that wanted space where grandma, dad, and kid could all go together and be able to use a trail, have shade provided, have something that the kids can do and kind of experience a landscape together. So that was one of our key principles. Education and recreation, which is, you know, part of everything that we do. Many, you know, folks in Lowell may not have an opportunity to experience a natural landscape. So providing educational opportunities about the environment was a key part of what was wanted to see here. And then growing space. I mentioned that the property is currently a farm, and that is part of our plan moving forward. Food insecurity is something that a lot of folks struggle with and wanted to, you know, have opportunities to learn how to grow their own food, as well as have access to purchasing healthy, locally grown food. So that's another kind of key element of the project. And then ecological stewardship, which again is an element of all of our work, but also something that the community really wanted to see happen here. So this is, we went through kind of a framework planning process and just have completed schematic design last month. So the plan you see on the right is our schematic design plan, and you can see that we've really concentrated the development and kind of density of use towards the lower southwestern end of the property, which runs along Varnum Ave. There's a bus stop here, easy access for the road. So this is really we've concentrated all the high development, high use elements of the property along that access road. This is also where the key production farm will take place, which is in the current farm cornfield location. So we're kind of taking advantage of space that's already been farmed and repurposing that to grow, you know, a variety of more diverse crops, healthier farming practices. And then from there, the farm kind of transitions into a food forest as the topography of the property kind of rises as you go to the northeast here. So as you go up that slope, there's a food forest, which will then transition into the focus of our ecological restoration work. So we have had, you know, a lot of discussions between our design team, our partner team, and our ecological conservation scientists about exactly where this trail should go. Actually had another one of those conversations just today. So it's sort of an ongoing back and forth. And some of the modifications that, you know, have been made through those conversations, as you can see, there's a potential kind of small wetland area on the upper right of this drawing. That trail has really significantly been modified to accommodate the restoration of that wetland. It's actually currently really just kind of a low wet spot. The vegetation there has been heavily managed, but it is an opportunity to restore a you know, diverse and robust wetland landscape. So we have adjusted the trail layout to accommodate that restoration. Similarly, I mentioned the sandplain grassland landscape was of particular interest. So the trails kind of in the lower right have also been modified actually around that soil typology to leave the sandy soil kind of available for that restoration and focus the trail impact elsewhere. So I think those are just a few examples, I think, of how our, staff expertise has partnered with our design team and our partner team to really kind of navigate how we can provide access to this property while, pursuing our ecological restoration goals at the same time. So I'm going to transition to Brewster's Woods. This is in Concord. And I'm just going to provide kind of a brief intro to give you some context and a little history of the property, and then I'll turn it over to EB to talk in more detail about kind of the design process. Just to kind of locate you geographically, this is Concord Center. The property is shown in red here along the Concord River. The property consists of 2 parcels, 130 acre total, and the Concord River along the right you can see here. There are a number of existing buildings on the property. This sort of H-shaped large building was a former residence, and there's a few kind of outbuilding barn structures and a few other residences as well. This property holds particular significance for Mass Audubon. It was actually the smaller of the 2 parcels was actually home to Mass Audubon's first president, William Brewster. He was president from 1896 to 1913. He was a very noted ornithologist. He was founder of the Nuttall Ornithological Society and very active in kind of the early development of the ornithological study. He lived in Cambridge, but he, in 1890, purchased 300 acres along the Concord River, which he called October Farm, and he had the farmhouse itself was on the west edge of the property, but from his journals and other research, we know that he really spent the majority of his time in a small cabin area along the Concord River. He spent the last 30 years of his life there observing birds and wildlife. And at the time, the common practice was to shoot birds to have specimens for study, but we know from his journals that through his experience on this property, he changed his methods of study and started to use photography as a means of studying birds. And he was very influential in kind of early bird conservation legislation. So these are actually one of his photographs of the property that is part of Mass Audubon's art collection. So just quickly to give you kind of a flavor of what the property looks like, in addition to the incredible cultural and historical significance of the organization, there's a huge range of ecological diversity in a fairly small area, and that includes open fields like what you see in this photo here, white pine forests, wetland impoundment, which was actually constructed by William Brewster specifically for the purpose of observing birds. And just briefly, since in the time since Brewster owned the property's been subdivided in a number of parcels. In 2018, the current residents of the William Brewster farmhouse purchased the 130 acres and donated it to Mass Audubon to protect in perpetuity, which was the largest gift in Mass Audubon history, and meant that what could have potentially been 60 to 90 homes on the property is now conserved land for future generations to enjoy. So similarly to the Pawtucket Farm property, our kind of planning and design process began with an ecological assessment and ecological management report that identified existing plants, forest typology, invasive species, climate change priorities as well. And this is just one example, identifying some of the key landscape types on the property. These reports are kind of a very descriptive analysis of the ecological attributes of a property, but when it comes to kind of synthesizing, those opportunities into how we can engage the public, how we can kind of weave the ecology into our educational opportunities, that's where we really rely on our design teams. And so on this property, when it came time to kind of move forward with the planning process, we engaged with Reed Hildebrand, who have been incredible partners. We selected them recognizing their sensitivity and kind of specificity to the way they design and to sites. So I'm going to turn it over to EB to talk in a little bit more detail about our design process at Brewster's Woods.
Thanks, Liz. It's nice to see those pictures. I will share my screen. Give me a moment here. Let's see if I can get this to be full screen and tell me if this works. Can you all see the screen?
Yes, full screen.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thanks, Liz. That was a great way to begin this conversation. Let's see if this works. Okay, I'm gonna start in a similar way with talking a little bit about who we are very briefly. For those of you who don't know Reed Hildebrand, we're an office of about 60 people from all over the world, but we have our main office in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and we have a smaller office in New Haven, Connecticut, and a little outpost in Austin, Texas. And we do work all over the country with focus on collaborations with communities and clients who share our interests and values, like Mass Audubon. And we really love to learn and love to engage and teach, but I would say mostly to learn, which is why the work that we do with organizations like Mass Audubon is so fulfilling, because we do get access to collaborate with, as Liz said, just a whole host of experts from whom we're able to learn a ton. And we also, in addition to the planning work that we do, we really design to build. So we have constructed many, many landscapes all over the country. And when we think about planning and when we think about design, we're also thinking about the nitty-gritty of infrastructure and materials and hydrology and soils and all the things that go into actually making a built landscape successful. We love all that technical stuff too. So the way we come to every project is really from a place of understanding a site, what we say, reading a site. We take a lot of inspiration from like the ethos of a place, how it was formed over time, how it's come to be used and loved by people. And these characteristics really inform our planning and design work. So we look at topography and vegetation, context, adjacencies, materiality, sun, shade, all those things, all the things that really make up, all these natural phenomena that make up, that make a place wonderful and magical and joyful, and places that people want to come to again and again. And so I'm actually gonna talk about similar to Liz, I'm going to talk about a couple of other projects that actually came before Brewster's Woods and set us up very nicely for our work at Brewster's Woods, and give a little bit of context to how we think about designing with an eye toward ecological improvement, ecological health, for people, but for critters and for people, and for the environment. So similarly to Mass Audubon, we're thinking about restoration and enhancement, but also balancing that with places that help people get closer to nature and understand the importance of our landscapes. So I'll talk a little bit, I'll try to go briefly through these. Residential project in Ohio. I'll talk about a museum project in Austin, Texas, and then Brewster's Woods. And part of the reason I'm highlighting these projects is because the original purview of, or kind of charge at Brewster's Woods included the possibility that the residential building that Liz mentioned would be transformed into the home of Mass Audubon's collection of American bird art. So it was considered that it may become a museum in this property that has, as Liz said, such an amazing and extensive set of distinct landscape experiences, could then also have the opportunity to host the art collection, depictions of nature, depictions of birds, and potentially, sculpture in the landscape and those sorts of things. And these two projects addressed some of those this overlap of a landscape, a landscape that is art in some ways and has such diversity, but is also a place for art. So I'm going to begin, I'm going to begin at this project in Ohio. This project, which we call Rowdy Meadow, is situated in Northeast Ohio. And you can see, and maybe some of you know about this legacy, this geological legacy of these steep, intricate river valleys carved by glaciers, over millennia, and that development in the region. So you can see this movement from like downtown Cleveland, from urban to suburban, out to this sort of post-agricultural rural landscape. And this site was nestled sort of right at that hinge between the suburban and rural settings. This project began for us in 2010 when our client purchased this property. It's about 150 acres. It was a former apple orchard. It was part of an estate that was originally planned by Warren Manning. And we began this really extensive investigation of the orchard, which was called Halford Farms, and its ravines. And our work continued over a decade through design and construction of many elements, including a private residence and gardens and drives and those kind of things. We then also were collaborating with a number of artists, including Andy Goldsworthy and Richard Serra, among others. And it's the owner's intent to turn this property over ultimately to a Northeast Ohio arts institution. They want to turn it into a public sculpture park, which is really foregrounding ecology as well as art. So that's the hope for the future. But right now it's a private residence with like a lot of really great art. And I should say that as this is sort of our, this was like the big epiphany for our project, this idea of designing for a very specific habitat. We worked with an ecologist, so similar to what Liz was describing and what happened for us at Mass Audubon. We worked with a local ecological team who helped us catalog and inventory and assess all the various opportunities and existing conditions. This original orchard had slowly declined, and it had been replaced by an expansive meadow, which was home to, in the spring and the summer, to flocks of bobolink, which is a ground nesting songbird. And it became the place where they would rear their chicks. And our client was actually very committed to preserving the meadows for annual use in the spring and summer as nesting habitat for the bobolinks. Apparently, these birds go from Canada, over 1,000 miles from Canada to Argentina, and their ideal habitat is uncut hayfields, pastures, abandoned fields, remnant prairies, etc. And they stop over. And it's also important to note that I guess the hay production and development has actually reduced the nesting habitat for bobolinks quite a bit. Almost half of the bobolinks have vanished since 1970. And this is research that, our ecologist helped us conduct. So our client was very clear. We were tasked to preserve this rare breeding habitat while also designing a program for a contemporary sculpture collection and a residence. We learned that these bobolink nests are really hidden, that even ornithologists sometimes can't find them. And so we learned about their specific spatial requirements, which again, grassland or meadow with a radius of 65 feet is the ideal for a microclimate for incubating eggs. And an additional 1,000 radius of unmown defendable land, irregularly shaped fields, few mature trees. Bobolinks return to places over and over again. So we understood that these fields would continue to be home for generations of birds. And in addition to this land management, we also worked to develop strategies targeting the reduction of predation. So aging apple trees, which could function as roosts for raptors, looking to feast on the young in the nests, they were removed. Buffers were developed at the field edges to encourage foraging by forest mammals to direct their energies away from the meadow. So this is the plan, which you can see the home up at the sort of northern end, but this is that irregular field dimensioned according to the needs of the bobolink with irregular edges, removal of predator nesting or predator trees, etc. And I should say that in addition to sort of this meadow work, we were also doing things like removing invasives. And as part of the meadow work, we were transitioning meadows from cool to warm season grasses. We were improving the old farm pond, which is also at the north there. And all of this was done over, again, many years, because the idea was that we wanted the project to kind of emerge, various aspects of the project to emerge as the land evolved, and be influenced by, the use of the land too. Again, there was this extensive sculpture program, I should say, that cited sculpture out. So here's the field that you can see. And on the right is the more sort of a little bit more domestic. We're entering into kind of a domestic landscape. This is the knoll on which the house sits, but beyond you can see that open farm. And a lot of these works were site specific. So this is one of the artworks. This is one of the Andy Goldsworthy works. This is the stone dam, which was actually designed to renew the ecological function of the farm pond. And this sculpture on the left here, which is an Anish Kapoor sculpture, is cited so that, in deference to this meadow and in deference to the bobolink, but it also kind of reflects the landscape. It's kind of teasing perceptions of the landscape and its inhabitants. And it's the idea of this piece in particular is to invite visitors to really reflect on their place in the landscape and their responsibility to think and act in support of the environment. So that was sort of a fun, very kind of ecologically focused in its intention, and we were lucky to have a client who really cared a lot about designing for the bobolink in particular. So this project is called Laguna Gloria, and this one is the museum project. Laguna Gloria is a peninsula on Lake Austin. It's one of two properties belonging to the Contemporary Austin, which is the city's preeminent contemporary art museum. And we were invited to transform this site into a sculpture park. And this site, it sits along the edge of Lake Austin, and we noticed that it was marked by these kind of two distinctive ecological zones. There was this more cultivated and upland, and then this wilder lowland. And the lowland had kind of degraded. It had been neglected. The habitat was quite diminished. There were many invasives. And so that's where we wound up focusing quite a bit of our attention, was in this really kind of vast lowland and at the water's edge. And the water was, this little peninsula, because it was a part of this historically very dynamic riparian corridor. It had a richness until 1982, when the Colorado River was dammed, and then the water became very static, and there was quite a bit of reduction in variety in terms of habitat and landscape types along the edge. And so we saw an opportunity to really try to manipulate the shoreline and get back some of that variety and variation in terms of habitat and vegetation. We did a lot of analysis, again, with the help of ecologists, and found that there were what we called 20 different landscape typologies. And our final report was about more than just the kind of identifying them, but it was also the potential within each of these, and what could be done to kind of enhance and experience these more, and bring people to them or near them, and how might they support the exhibition, again, of art, frankly, that enhances people's experience of a place. And again, circulation program, giving kind of names to these various zones, understanding the habitat sensitivities and how we would respond in terms of design interventions to those sensitivities, what wildlife resides within each of those various zones, and how that also influences how you site art or how you develop paths or pavements, and how you interact with each of these zones. And just as an example of one of these, well, I'll show two, but the Cypress Glens, which was one of those identified zones, has this dense canopy of the cypress. And so here we're suggesting that a new boardwalk can it can sort of be a counterpoint to that very varied topography, but allow people in to see this wetland and experience sculpture that is, in this case, what we say suspended and ephemeral. The shoreline meander is another type of category that we identified. And again, the boardwalk sort of brings people out over this zone, allowing you to encounter this. And here we're saying we're creating a wetland swale that has a little bit more dynamic characteristic during, and after storm events, that allows for that edge to become a little more varied. And so just to give you a sense of what that really might look like, this is the existing condition, which has a lot of invasive species, and this is in that lowland area. And the goal here is removing invasive species, clearing the understory, installing a temporary cover crop before the final, the sort of grassland or the woodland grassland emerges. And then in a site that is a more meadow ecology, here again, we're removing the invasive seed bank in the soil, in removing other invasives, and developing a plan over time for the meadow to reemerge, starting with an early successional cover crop. So now we're at so now we launch into Brewster's Woods with these projects in our portfolio, and with a sense of kind of how it works to work with ecologists, and to start to think about spatially and experientially how you engage ecology in design. We were invited, I think it was 2019 or 2020, it was shortly after the purchase, right, Liz? So 2020, yeah, to look at Brewster's Woods with Mass Audubon. And as Liz said, I mean, I'll try not to repeat things that you've already said, but this is a property in Concord, Massachusetts. Some of you may know the area, right along the Concord River, 143 acres. And the eastern boundary of the sanctuary, which is along that Concord River, hopefully people can see my cursor, which, by the way, I should say the Concord River is a nationally designated wild and scenic river. Across the river is the Great Meadows National Wildlife Refuge. And so you can also see there are a lot of neighboring important open space, conservation land, et cetera. Walden Pond is right nearby. Great Brook Farm is to the north. Neshoba Brook to the northwest on this plan. It's also just along Monument Street, which is a north-south road in Concord that actually connects really important historical and cultural sites, like the Old Manse, the Robbins House, Concord Museum, as we said, Walden Pond. And those sites were exciting to us because they really are, Concord is a place that is known for its historic association with environmental consciousness and political thought. And early on in the project, we were excited about the idea that Brewster's Woods could start to manifest some of Mass Audubon's action agenda that Liz mentioned at the beginning, including, investigating whether we could increase access here to more people, whether it could be a site of learning and gatherings and conferences and those kind of things. Now, I will say that those opportunities shifted a little bit as we started to get into community engagement, as you can imagine. But that was an exciting connection for us to Concord and to Concord's cultural history. So this project was fun for us too, because of the history that Liz mentioned of William Brewster being an early inhabitant or living on the property at the turn of the century. And also thinking about the stories that maybe haven't been told about this place. And how this relates to ecology, I think, is that what we know is that people have used and manipulated and interacted with this land, this site, over thousands and thousands of years. And as much as we like to say, oh, it's natural, this is, we should make it look the way it's always been, it's almost impossible to know what it's always been. And the truth is that the things that we think look beautiful now are probably things that Indigenous and Native peoples manipulated to be beautiful. And we appreciate the beauty now because of the stewardship and the things that many of them did early on. So, we're thinking about what benefits this land had for people going back a long, long time, and thinking about what Liz mentioned, which is that Brewster himself manipulated the land and created this impoundment. In this image, you see it in the foreground. So we're looking, this is sort of an oblique view of the property, looking sort of northwest. Monument Street is the road at the left here, and the Concord River is at the right. And the little dam, there's sort of a dam here, that Davis Island here, which my cursor is on, is the boundary of this impoundment that William Brewster made in order to observe the birds and wildlife, but mostly birds and ducks and that sort of thing. This drawing is sort of an interpretation of some of what we learned in the ecological report, including an assessment or a description of various landscape zones. And so here you see basically the pastures and yards and sort of domestic zones that were around the residence. So this is the primary residence on the larger property. And the owners had, really kind of created a very sort of traditional domestic environment immediately around the house, cleared some pasture for horses, and then horses here too. I think, Liz, was that horses too? Yeah, they both. And so there were these kind of like clearings that were opportunities, but were not very diverse in terms of their vegetation. They were sort of single species grassland. We learned that the silver maple floodplain forest is one of the most unique and kind of rare woodland typologies in the area. And so that was something that felt really important to protect. But overall, the property was largely this white pine mixed oak forest, which is not extremely rare or, particularly unique in the region, but was still had some really lovely qualities and really like sort of spectacular moments. So there was this variety of kind of like the silver maple floodplain forest, which is just sort of really breathtaking and unique. The domesticated yard, this was the house that William Brewster had lived in. So this was the one over by Monument Street. And then that white pine mixed oak forest. We looked at topography and elevation. The site ranges over, has over 100 feet of grade change from Monument Street, which is the high point, down to the river. And it really has this like lovely undulating, again, a very glaciated landscape. You see these undulations along the edge of the water that we were really excited about and wanted to kind of highlight. You see an image of that on the upper right. And then there were also these very steep ridge lines along the water, but also kind of elsewhere in the property, that these sort of north-south terrace almost of ridges. So the light pink is flat and the deeper red is steep. And so one of our first ideas for this, which I think Liz was kind of alluding to, is a way of thinking about how you organize a property of this size around the existing site conditions. And what we observed is that there were buildings up on knolls. So that was kind of an observation we made. And then there was this terraced landscape that went sort of from ridge to valley to ridge to valley. And we really liked the idea of drawing a transect across from the cultural trail along Monument Street to the river trail, what we were calling the river trail, which is really like canoes and kayaks and such, at the Concord River. And thinking about how you can bring people to experience along that transect all these different variety of typologies and moments of the property. And that became kind of a way for us to think about organizing the site. The other thing that, as I said, was really useful to us was this assessment of where the most sensitive ecologies exist. And so in this drawing, the more sensitive is the darker green. And so that silver maple floodplain forest is here, but there are also really kind of special zones and wetland boundaries along this ravine that runs sort of through the property. There were some vernal pools and other kind of important swamps, like the red maple swamp on both ends. that we knew we wanted to keep. And then there were these places that, like as I said, the not very diverse meadow and the white pine forest that were less sensitive or more pervasive. And out of that, we developed a drawing that we called Opportunities for Change. And so it's sort of the flip of the previous drawing, but, you know, seems kind of dumb, but it actually was very helpful to us, because we said, these are the areas, the darker areas are now the zones that we could imagine there could be more development, or there could be more change in terms of improvement, in terms of ecological improvement of what exists now. So the meadow we saw as an opportunity to diversify in terms of habitat for pollinators. It wasn't quite big enough per the ecological report to function as a real, I mean, there are some birds, but it had more potential as a pollinator meadow. So that's what we focused on, is finding vegetation that would function in that way. And then the white pine mixed oak forest was most pervasive and could accommodate minimal clearing for future access roads or paths. And then these very even-aged pine forests at Davis Hill and there was a location in between the two clearings that has a lot, just a whole bunch of white pines. We're going to all kind of decline at the same rate, and they needed to be addressed. And then the orchard and the other domestic landscape areas around the museum, what we said was should be evaluated for current contributions and opportunities for alternative future use in support of the site and the museum. And what that really turned into was an idea about what we called rewilding the area around the house. Before I get into some of that, I just want to go back to this idea of drawing zones that related to the programmatic goals at the time of the project, and how these zones were related to the cultural trail, to the river trail. They were related to topography, and they were related to these sensitive ecological zones. So there was a zone along Monument, which we called the threshold zone, that was more public facing, that was welcoming, that had been previously disturbed, so had an opportunity for things like parking, a welcome center, those kind of things. The center zone, which was we called the woodland convening zone, was more private, was more quiet. And so that seemed like good places for things like field stations, trails, small gathering areas, those kind of things. So this became the kind of framework for how we were thinking about planning. Welcome and connect, teach and learn, create and act, and then observe and protect and take measure, which was about scientific data gathering. We were hoping that those kind of too. And the planning principles that were guiding all of this. Number one was highlight and protect important ecosystems. Number two was build upon existing site patterns and systems. So again, development kind of on knolls, preserving the valleys, inspire active participation, and draw people to the river. This is a lot of text, but what I want to just note is that ultimately what we were most excited about and what got a lot of traction and I think was useful for Mass Audubon when talking about the project were these four kind of categories. One is that we were about restoring previously disturbed natural systems to enhance ecological function and biodiversity. So we converted 12 acres of existing monoculture pasture to more diverse meadow, extended meadow areas around the existing house, transforming lawn areas to native plantings. We removed or plan to remove approximately half a mile of redundant, steep and inaccessible trails. You know, just a whole host of things that were really in support of that ecological function and biodiversity. And then we also expanded access and connected to regional amenities, preserved sensitive ecosystems and important habitat areas, and limited site disturbance to keep within previously altered landscape areas. And finally, this is the existing conditions plan of the site. So again, you can see that kind of that meadow and the sort of domestic landscape around the main house, as well as over at the other house at Monument Street. And then our proposal, this is the sort of framework plan, comprehensive plan proposal, was about expanding and diversifying that meadow, engulfing the main house, removing the existing kind of more domestic, like things like orchard and flowering shrubs and non-native things, and really embedding that building into the meadow. Increase the diversity of those pine woodlands, providing some access for observation and study of the wetland system, and interpreting historical land use and stewardship at the impoundment. So this was our jumping off point about a year and a half ago, I think, Liz, is that right? And Mass Audubon has begun targeted sort of preliminary projects, has already installed much of the All Persons Trail, which I didn't really get into, but we can maybe answer questions about that if there are any. But there are portions of this plan that have begun to be implemented and are in progress as we speak. So I will stop there and stop sharing my screen and open it up for questions.
And Liz, that was great. If anybody has any questions, they can either come off mute, or if they would prefer to raise a hand or put them in the chat, feel welcome to do that.
I have a
EB,
question.
Sorry,
Oh.
yeah, go ahead, Alan. Go ahead.
Also, thanks so much. I just wanted to ask, I'm kind of liking a lot of this movement towards maybe some of the more open habitats as being the basis of what you're trying to restore and conserve. And I think that there's probably a more of a popular cultural motivation or preference for forests. In your kind of engagement with communities, did you find that there was a tension there, where you're kind of like actually saying, no, we're going to do something like a hay meadow or a landscape that's a bit more agricultural almost, as opposed to restoration towards a forest?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I would say that in these projects, we didn't have a lot of community input into the what the landscape ultimately became. I mean, Liz, you may have had more of that at Pawtucket Farm, but like, to answer your question maybe a little differently, yes, there is something about an understanding or a familiarity with a more agricultural landscape and that people are drawn to, in terms of like converting something from lawn to something else. We have found this, like we're doing a project right now with a town on the Cape, and we are even having trouble convincing people that they should change this huge expansive lawn to like a portion of it to a pollinator meadow, because everybody says it's always been a lawn, so it feels like it should still be a lawn. And it's like, like, let alone, like, we're also trying to say, like, over time, you know, what meadows turn into actually are forests. So, you know, like, we don't even touch that. We don't even like get to that because people are even still sort of scared of the idea of changing something that they're familiar with. And in this case, it is kind of a remnant of an agricultural typology for sure. But that's not to say that people don't also love the forests and the woodlands, because definitely there's so much interest in that as well. Yeah. It's just a longer time frame. So it's harder for us to say, yeah, we're going to build a woodland. That takes a long time. Sometimes people don't have as much patience. What were you going to say, Liz?
Well, I was just gonna say, I think on a few projects I've been involved in, there's certainly a lot of education that goes along with our outreach, and I'm not so much, I can't think of an example where we're kind of developing, you know, the pollinator issue has been challenging, but we do often need to remove trees to create a healthier habitat, healthier ecology. Particularly Evie mentioned, you know, we have this successional white pine forest that people are very attached to trees and don't want to see trees cut down, even if that is the healthier thing for the landscape in the long term. So definitely a lot of education that goes along with the kind of evolution of a landscape through a restoration process.
Thank you.
Liz, you mentioned evolution. What do you, are any is climate change and like these heavy rain patterns and are they impacting how you're managing like stormwater or different types of species? You know, there's species that are native and drought tolerant. Are you finding how are you adapting to climate change in your designs for your properties? Or are you? And I'm sure you're thinking about that.
Yes, definitely. I think that's, you know, something these ecological assessment reports begin to identify what are, for each particular site, what are the biggest ecological challenges that property may face due to climate change. And, you know, there's many particular species of trees that have pests that are more prevalent. Do we need to think about, you know, replacing those with a different species? All of that is certainly a big part of our management process, and stormwater too. I mean, we, you know, this last summer and the beginning of this winter, it is a constant challenge. So definitely when we're looking to design new properties, how we think about stormwater management is a big part of that, and we're trying to take advantage of that as an educational opportunity where we can, and have kind of visible, you know, rainwater gardens, collecting rainwater off of roofs, and, you know, again, using that as kind of an opportunity for education. And I'm sure, I imagine EB in your design process, it's probably something that you're encountering all the time too.
Absolutely. I mean, I would say probably the most, we just went through a process, our firm did, of developing the urban forest master plan. Is that what it's called? For the city of Cambridge. And such a big part of that, John, is addressing climate change and how there's a whole new set of species and a whole new that, you know, I mean, I think we have a new zone too. I think we've been like rezoned, but also how certain tree species are better withstand longer periods of drought, more inundation, you know, all those kind of things. It's like there has to be a whole new understanding of what works. What we thought worked there's different stuff now. And we did, yeah, I mean, we didn't talk about it, but at Brewster's Woods, we had a really great engineering partner, Niche Engineering, who helped us think about stormwater management really proactively and like progressively. We did have a lot of management for the new parking and roof water runoff that was directed to a rethought pool that had been on site that was sort of a natural pool that's, you know, was maybe going to be a stormwater rain garden, actually. And they really are well versed in thinking about, you know, future resiliency related to climate change. So they provided a good bit of insight into that for us too, in terms of managing stormwater in particular.
Well, there's a question in the chat about Brewster's
Yeah.
Woods and what is the project timeline. As Evie just mentioned, we have begun some of the work that we, started in the planning process with Reed Hildebrand, including this accessible all persons trail, which you can go to the property and enjoy now. There's a small trailhead parking area, and it's a little over a mile out and back trail that brings you kind of from the midpoint of the property through the forest and that meadow and down to the edge of the Concord River. So that is available now. We haven't had an official opening for it, but it is, open to access. And we are just beginning to kind of embark on a next phase of planning and design for additional facilities on the property. But right now it's really focused on the accessible trail as well as some existing unsurfaced trails as well. I strongly encourage everybody to get out there if you have a chance.
Are there any other questions for folks that are here? I really appreciate the chance to hear about these projects. It was fascinating. As an architect, I don't think I think enough about all of this. So it was, lovely repast from buildings taking over everything. At least in my world. But is there, if anyone else has any other questions, please, raise your hand or come on board. And if not, I want to thank you both, and John, thank you for setting this up. We really appreciate it. It was a lovely talk, and a nice way to see green on a kind of frozen night. So
Definitely.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much for having us. Thanks for
Yes.
inviting us, John. That was fun.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for agreeing. This is great. Fantastic.
Good. Thanks all.
Thank-
Thanks for your
Thank
questions.
you all.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Lovely. Great talk.
Bye.
Bye.